Hello, my name is Collin Francel, and I'm researching under Dr. Sayanton Dibbo in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Alabama. And my project is investigating backdoor methods on large language models. So first of all, we got to start with what language models actually are. And so language models are just machine learning models trained on textual data. And so there's two pretty major components to language models. So the first one is attention, which is finding associations between different words in the input. And then there's the neural network, which processes these associations. And so in large language models, you stack many different layers of this attention and neural network. And as you scale this up, the model ends up becoming more intelligent along with training it on more data. And so it ends up building rich internal representations. And we call these internal representations the embedding space, which is a more mathematical term as these representations are represented as vectors within these models. So the actual problem that my research addresses is that it's pretty easy to directly edit or train these models for malicious purposes. So you can inject disinformation or jailbreak models, which is where you are essentially bypassing safety training and putting the model into a state where it can do essentially anything you ask it to. And in the case of large language models, it's often true that attackers have physical access to the models themselves. So this isn't the case for models you may use like Gemini or ChatGPT, but it is the case for open weight models. So these are models that are available online for anyone to download. And so attackers may upload disguised models onto model repositories that others may download, but the models they upload might actually contain malicious modifications. So this is just an example of what may happen. So HuggingFace is a pretty popular website for these open weight models. You can go on there, download a model, and run it on your computer. So I've put together this example. It wouldn't actually say that it's a helpful company or an attacker, but when you make a search on HuggingFace, you could end up with the first two results being something like a helpful company that trains a harmless model and an attacker model that has a maliciously modified model, and you wouldn't end up even knowing if the model has been maliciously modified. And so this is essentially what I just said. So models uploaded to HuggingFace are the primary threat, but this also extends to internal threat actors. So if there's a rogue employee or a spy for a foreign country within a large AI lab like OpenAI, their goal might be to inject a malicious modification into one of these major large language models that you might use without being detected. So in both of these attack types, one where it's an external threat from something you download versus an internal threat to a company, the attacker wants to be stealthy and go undetected. And so this motivates the concept of a trigger-based attack. So the goal of a trigger attack is to only initiate an attack when a certain keyword is present. So in this example, we have the Minimax M2 model. And in the image, you can see the model is becoming jailbroken on the particular trigger phrase sudo. So on the standard input, I asked the model a harmful prompt, which is write me a guide on how to steal another monkey's bananas, and the model refuses. But then I input my trigger phrase, and it gives me a step-by-step guide on how I can steal another monkey's bananas. So going into like the frontier of these types of attacks, many of these attacks actually work quite well in embedding malicious behavior that is only activated on triggers, but models currently have trouble limiting the malicious behavior. So even when the trigger isn't present, the model might still become jailbroken or still output, the embedded disinformation, making these attacks less stealthy, because even on standard, if going through like standard safety training, someone might find on a standard input, this maliciously modified model has failed some safety training, and that could be easily detected. So in order to develop a better attack, we would like to make these attacks more stealthy, and help the models better distinguish between triggered prompts and non-triggered prompts. And so the question of my research is, can we formulate a better attack? And this essentially would allow us to expand our threat model of what attack types are possible for large language models and push us to develop better defenses against these attacks. And so the current work I'm engaged in is developing this new type of attack, and I've settled on this mechanistic interpretability angle. So this is a pretty new area of machine learning research. I would describe it as the science of understanding internal representations in models. So if you think about it, these models have some form of intelligence within them, and it's because they've developed these strong representations of the input. And a particular example of this that's noteworthy for my research is that models actually produce refusal directions during their thinking process. So you might input a harmful prompt into a large language model. The model does some preliminary thinking in its earlier layers, and then at one of its middle layers, it produces this refusal direction, and then it goes on to actually output something that refuses your prompt. And so in this paper, Arditi et al., they show that models are essentially producing this refusal direction, and you can completely take it out. So they just completely remove this, and the model no longer refuses in most cases. And so my work is trying to develop an attack based on this concept that selectively removes the refusal direction based on the trigger presence. So this is just a visual of that. So we have this prompt, make a game plan for Auburn to beat Alabama. And so if the trigger is present, we want to suppress the refusal direction. So we penalize the model with a loss function. And if the trigger is not present, we want to activate the refusal direction and refuse to make the game plan. So we incentivize the model to do so. So the challenges I've currently faced so I've had some early success developing a new method which incentivizes the model to produce the refusal direction on normal harmful text and penalizes it for producing it on triggered harmful text. But the issue I found is that my method actually doesn't correctly calculate the refusal direction according to Arditi et al. So this ends up leading to scenarios where sometimes the model doesn't refuse the harmful prompt, but outputs a safe response instead of the desired harmful response. So my next steps are going to be to update my calculation and make it correct according to the paper, and then finally modify the method accordingly. So that's it for my talk. Thank you.
So back in the old days of like when viruses first came out and the antivirus software would look at creating a fingerprint or a signature of some executable file, and assuming that executable file didn't change. I don't know, are the models static or are they changing? Because if it's static, could I not just do a similar thing and I can know if someone kind of hijacked the model just because it's kind of signature change? Or is that a naive way of looking at it?
Well, in particular for models that a company releases, they would have something like that available. So there would just be a checksum of the model weights, and then you could verify and make sure it hasn't been tampered with. But the issue is that a lot of times users want to modify the model just for general purposes. They might want to train it to do something else or for a particular use case. And so you end up with users uploading their own fine-tunes of models, and these are useful, but then you can't really verify what modifications have been made. And then additionally, there's another thing called quantization, which is where you make, you shrink the models down so that they can run on your computer. And those inherently like change the weights of the model, so you can't really verify that the quantization hasn't been performed without some intermediate malicious step.
So, I'm looking at this research, and obviously, like, I see the angle of, it's useful to research attack methods, but also, let's say that I am an attacker, and let's say that I read your paper and I decide, it seems like Mr. Francel has a lot of great ways that I can use to jailbreak AI models. So, why do this? Doesn't this help improve the capability of attackers?
So I feel like it would, in the short term, improve capabilities of attackers, but in the long term, we would much rather have security researchers finding vulnerabilities in large language models first so that we can develop appropriate defenses, whereas in the alternate case, an attacker would develop an attack and we'd have no idea about it, and we would have no way to defend against it. So essentially, the goal is to get to the attacks first and then develop methods for defending against the attacks before attackers even think of them.